Mr. Genuis, please explain motion 754 to us, and why do you think that IRGC is detrimental to Canada's national safety and security, and at what point did you decide to propose such motion? Time is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. It's great to be on with all of you, and I want to, as always, salute the courage of the families who are impacted by the terrible shooting down of that flight, and salute your courage speaking out following that terrible event. So I put forward a motion in Parliament 3 years ago. At the time, I was the Deputy Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, working with Aaron O'Toole, who's now our leader, of course, who at the time was our Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs. And the motion had a number of different asks and issues within it with respect to the Iranian state and their actions. One of them was a call to immediately, and I'll emphasize the word immediately, list the IRGC as a terrorist entity under the criminal code. And I think this is something that's supported actually really all across the Iranian community. I know there are some different perspectives about the best way to handle the situation overall in terms of the regime and the challenges of standing up for human rights, while also people wanting to have access to the country and family members. But measures like this, which really target the perpetrators of violence, are I think overwhelmingly supported within the community and beyond. And there was some reluctance, to be frank, in the Liberal Party about supporting this motion, but there were some political circumstances around the time that made them feel that they just needed to support it. And at the time, the media kind of covered the Liberal support for our motion as a fairly dramatic about face. In the early years of their government, they were talking about trying to really warm things up with the regime, and the perception was that this decision to support our opposition motion was a success of parliamentary debate and democracy, because we were able to force a seeming change in direction. Unfortunately, it turned out that change in direction was more a change of signal than a change of substance, and it has now been 3 years since the motion passed to immediately list the IRGC, and we have not seen any steps to list it. And we've asked this question over and over again to the government, and there's a few things they'll say. They'll say, well, the Al-Quds force is already listed. Keep in mind that the Al-Quds force was actually listed previously by the previous Conservative government and was listed prior to the adoption of that motion. And yet they still voted for the motion, which was to list the IRGC in its entirety. Now they've said it's still under investigation. It's still being investigated. They won't actually be honest enough to come out and admit, which is almost certainly the case, which is that they have decided not to comply with that parliamentary motion for whatever reason. Just to put in context these timelines, I mean, it does take some time to go through the listing process, but it doesn't take 3 years. And earlier this year, there was following the terrible attack on Capitol Hill, there was some concern about quote unquote far right or alt right terrorist organizations, and a motion passed in Parliament calling on the government to list the Proud Boys as a terrorist entity. The government acted on that within a month. So within a month, they were able to go from a particular catalyst event to choosing to list an organization. Meanwhile, it's been almost 3 years with the IRGC. So I would submit to you that it is very clear that this is not a question of it just takes some time to do the investigation. This is a clear policy choice. A few other things about the context of that motion. One was that there were a substantial number of Liberal MPs, including, for instance, Majid Jahari from Richmond Hill, who did not attend the vote. So there were a lot of absences from the vote. I don't think it was a bout of the flu that was keeping everybody from showing up for the vote. So that suggested that, notwithstanding the fact that the Liberal caucus voted for it, there was division about even sending this signal, and now there's been no action. Of course, the downing of flight PS 752 has been was since then, was a year ago, and that underlines just the violence at the heart of the IRGC, the capricious disregard for human life that has so characterized this regime and this organization. My belief is that we need to be very clear in standing with the Iranian people, and in standing with peoples all over the world who are victims of violence and oppression. I think too often we get this kind of moral relativism from politicians who say, well, we do things our way, but this is just something about cultural differences, or we're not going to try to impose our values on other people. So let's be very clear about this. We're not trying to impose our values on anybody. We are standing in solidarity with everyday people in other parts of the world who have as much desire for freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law as people in Canada. Standing with those who are victims of violence and oppression is in no way imposing your values. It's rather protecting the right of everyday people to be heard, to have their values, desires, aspirations heard. And I know very clearly from the Iranian Canadian community, as well as what we've seen, the courageous protesters in Iran, that the people of Iran very much desire freedom, desire protection for human rights, and that just comes through so loud and so clearly, and we need to stand with them. One final point I wanted to make is that following some of the issues associated with foreign state-backed interference, I put forward a motion in Parliament, Motion 55, that is aimed at pushing the government to respond more effectively to foreign state-backed interference. I've heard, for instance, from some of the families affected by the downing of flight PS 752, that when they've tried to share their experiences and speak out about the cause of this violence, that they've actually faced intimidation and threats from the Iranian state. And this isn't an issue that is unique to the Iranian community. We have people from the Chinese community, people from the Saudi community that are highlighting these issues of foreign states with authoritarianism in their DNA, trying to reach beyond their borders and actually threaten and intimidate and harm Canadians who are speaking out about human rights issues in these countries. And there's been a lot of frustration from people who have been victims of this kind of activity, that they try to raise these issues and they get the runaround. There's a lack of clarity about whether they're going to get support from Global Affairs, from local police, from the RCMP, from CSIS, what exactly the process is, and making sure that we have the resources to understand and respond to what is, I think, increasingly becoming the primary threat to our national security, which is the actions of foreign state-backed authoritarian states here in Canada, and the impact on Canadians, especially of Canadians from diasporic community backgrounds. So in addition to supporting the listing of the IRGC, I would appreciate your support for Motion 55 and for calls on the government to do more in general to respond to foreign state-backed interference and to support those who are victims of it. Thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this event today.
Thank you so much, the Honorable Garnett Genuis.